Hello and welcome to the podcast. You're going to join me today with Tom and Emma as we talk about Joshua.
Who's the most courageous out of us three, do you think?
You. Me and Nick, like, absolutely.
On the table tennis table, I'll take that one.
No, there's a difference between courage and anger. I feel like you're not a courageous table tennis player. You're a violent table tennis player. There's a big difference.
I think that's slander.
I think it's just true.
And Ali's point on Sunday was Jesus was courageous through his weakness.
Exactly. I think Nick could do well to hear. You said you hadn't listened to Ali yet. I feel like you should make some time this afternoon to listen to Ali. Maybe on the walk home. Get the headphones in.
Everyday courage, Nick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Courage to not be violent at lunchtimes on the table tennis table. No, seriously, who would be the courageous?
Who would we say is the most courageous person that we think, like, in history or...
History.
But then it's come back into what is courage, isn't it?
Who's the most... Yeah. Yeah, and is it courage to do what is right? So it's
In the face of adversity.
In the face of adversity, yeah. That's why, I mean, maybe not the most courageous person, but I like when Rahab got highlighted this week, it's like, can you imagine the level of courage it would have taken her to stand up for, like, she has this understanding of who God is based on, like, what she's heard and this massive army are coming, these people are coming, did you know, like, their God parted the Red Sea and brought them out of slavery, and the king was saying, whoever finds these spies, like, find them, root them out, get them out, and she's saying, no, like, I'm more scared of God, and I'm more fearful in a healthier way of who God is, and I've got a big picture of who God is rather than being afraid of this king. It's like, I like, can you imagine if, like, King Charles rocked up and told us to, like, I don't know, give up Nick, otherwise we'd be in trouble. It's like, would I genuinely hold on to him, or would I, because it's Prince Charles, I'd just be like, no, have him.
I don't think King Charles is that threatening.
I don't think.
Maybe not
threatened by me.
No.
Nick can take him.
He hasn't played you at table tennis. But like that, would you have the courage to stand up to power and authority in that way, like she did? And I think that's hugely courageous, maybe even more so than I think some of what Joshua does. Is that, like, no, I'm going to hide them.
Yeah, and I guess you can see or you can imagine in some sort of countries where Christianity is persecuted and like the persecuted church and stuff, how courage is something that everyone's having to have on a daily basis because of their faith. But I guess the question is, well, what does it look like for us in our society to have courage when we're not persecuted, when we can rock up at a church on a Sunday morning, sit on the back row, and that be the full sum of Christianity for us? And what does it look like to be courageous, to be taking steps of faith and to be moving forwards?
I mean, I wrote down in my preach notes, like, if you look at what courage is, you know, Ali said, it's trusting in the Lord as our true source of strength. And the command there, be strong and very courageous, it's to Joshua, isn't it, to say, don't rely on your own strength. This is me, God, who is going to sustain you. Everything that I'm asking, it's me. I'm going to do this through you. And I think, I mean, what does that look like? What does courage look like for me? I think some of my biggest struggles is with anxiety. And you look at, I think, the what if. So I have a lot of what if thoughts that then can spiral me out. And it's always bad. It's never, what if I win the lottery? Or it's always really bad ones that can spiral out. And, I remember a preacher, or it was someone who said, turn those what if thoughts to even if. So the what if thoughts say, it makes you go, well, I have to sort this out. This is like, you create a massive drama in your head that then the reliance and the weight of you having to sort that out falls on you. Yeah. Whereas when you say, even if this bad thing happens, God is enough. And so, I love that. That is then saying, I trust you, God, to be the source of my strength. And, that's where the verse goes on to, doesn't it? It says, be strong and very courageous. Have the law always on your lips. So that's God's word. Meditate on it day and night. So have God's word in your mind and then be ready to act on it. Do not, then you will be prosperous and successful. And the prosperous and successful isn't like the rest of your life's going to be fine. So all of these what if scenarios that I've imagined, it's not that they might not happen. It's that even if they happen, God's presence is going to be with me. And that is what is going to make me prosperous and successful.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to choose
to
that
walk
truth.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. In Hedge End, on Sunday, one of the phrases that was going around in my mind was, when we were listening to Emily, was that we're to take steps of obedience, but we're to trust God with the outcome. And I think that fits in with what you just described there. You're taking, even when it's hard or you're fearful or you're anxious, our response is not to have everything planned out, and I love a plan, but our response is to have everything, is not to have everything planned out and know where we're going and what it's going to look like in the end, but to trust God with that. And actually we're just to take the step of obedience for now that he's showing us and that he's telling us, and that's a challenge.
It is a challenge because there are going to be big decisions in our lives that we have to face, but also there are the everyday. So I love that you've got the contrast of Emily talking about these big moments, and then Ali's preaching Totten, it was about everyday courage, and there will be both, isn't it? So it's to live courageous every day in the small things and in those big decisions.
I think it's like what fuels the courage, like you say, is God's word, which is really appropriate for obviously what we're doing in the Bible, book by book. But there's also the moment, isn't there, when they cross the river and they do the memorial stones from out the water and from the side, and they place it back in, and just that, like, how important it also is to remember God's faithfulness in the past and use that as a kind of deposit of, okay, well, I know I can trust him for the future. And we were talking before, weren't we, like we've all in our different ways got, like, me and Ali have since we stepped out in faith with Totten, and I cut my hours and we went all in there in terms of me focusing my time there. We have a list on our phone of just God's blessings and provisions that he's been so good with, and it ranges from like people paying for holidays to random envelopes through the door that we used to say we'd never be the kind of people who would get that, and family coming through, like just tiny little things, free dining room tables, like all that sort of stuff just accumulates, and actually on the days where we think it's, oh God, did we really do the right thing? Oh God, this is now really tight and this is struggling. We've got this big thing to look back on and just say, no, you've been faithful. You've called us to do this. And we see it in Joshua. It's important for us too, right? It doesn't, it's got to come through remembering his faithfulness as well. Yeah.
It's good. And I just thinking of that with them laying the stones down. They're laying them down for future generations to see. And I think regardless of whether you've got kids or not, there'll be people coming after us in church life, in our communities. Well, what does it look like for us to put down sort of flags in the ground, remember the stories of the past, and maybe within the church context, or maybe within your family context or your friendship context. But what does it look like to mark things? I think that the Israelites were great at this. They had festivals, didn't they? They had different ways of remembering things, and we sort of lose that a little bit. We have Christmas and we have Easter.
Do we need a new bank holiday?
We always need a new bank holiday. I think it's just something that we need to put things in place to remember, and for our future generations to remember.
That's really good. And because as well, I think like a lot of what we talked about as well, it's really easy to apply to us as individuals. But we've also got, like, there's a corporate call, isn't there, as well? On Joshua is a book about the people of God taking the promised land, not just Joshua. And yes, he had to have everyday courage, but it also says that he then led the people and instructed them to be strong and courageous. And like, even for us, like, I know the journey that we're on, it's not just about the finances, but, you know, Andy's email dropped last week, didn't it, of like what we're going for the special offering. And that's another collective moment as a church where we have to remind ourselves of the truth in God's word, what he's promised us. We have to remind ourselves of what he's done in the past to prove himself faithful, and then look again with eyes of faith to the future and say, okay, this is a courageous thing that we've all got to go in on again, and of of going on and on that. And I always love listening to you, Nick, around special offering times, around kind of how the spies in the land. Oh, you always encourage me with that. Give everyone your encouragement on that. It's good.
Just that story from Exodus where the spies go into the promised land, and then 10 of them come back scared, and Joshua and Caleb come back in faith. And the difference between the two is not that the giants were still there for Joshua and Caleb, but they came away with faith. And just the thought really of it always comes around when we're talking about the finances in meetings and stuff, and it just this thought of the giants are there. We've got a big mortgage, we've got big dreams and big hopes and big things for the future, and we have promises as well over the church and what God's going to do here. The giants are still there. We have to choose to land in a place of faith and not choose to land in a place of fear. Because we don't want to go around the desert for another 40 years like the Israelites did. We want to see the land taken. And so I love that when we're sort of coming up to obviously special offering in March, but then at the end of March we're sending Hope City to go. And that is the kingdom expanding. That is a promised land for us, really. There's been promises and prophetic words over the Hope Centre and over Hope City and over Western that we've carried here, and that Darren at Holy Trinity has carried as well, and Dave and Emily and their team have carried. And that's an example of the promised land that God's got for us as a people, not just for one person. It's not just Joshua who had to be strong and courageous. It's the people of Israel. They all inherited the land. And as a community, as a church community, God's got land for us to inherit, and promises for us. And Totten, and you guys moving over to Totten, and that's a part of it. And we will see that continue to roll out over the coming years. God fulfilling His promises to us.
And I think it's like it was the whole reason we went to Totten as the first, the first site. Was because that's the word from Isaiah of to the east and to the west, and so there's the whole Solent area that it is Hope City, it is Western, it is Totten, it is Hedgem, but it's the Solent area, isn't it? And there's it's something that we do individually, so it is about how am I living differently today and taking steps of courage, so that when I see my neighbour or I go into work, but there is a corporate thing that we do that together, don't we? We're a family on mission together that just seeks. I don't know what does that look like for us to live differently, in light of knowing that God is the one who is, He's given us the land, or He's given us the Solent area. I loved Ali said that God's kingdom is not being built on people. So it's not like Totten isn't resting on Tom. So it wasn't built on Joshua, but it was built on God's promises. And so God has so many promises for all the different communities, workplaces. And I know it'd be so good if like some of you commented, if you're listening, commented about what God's spoken to you about for your neighbourhood, your street, your workplace, your schools, and just the promises over those places in the Solent area, because this is a promise for us corporately, isn't it? But we all individually have a choice to be obedient and to be courageous.
It ties in, doesn't it, with later on when he says, like, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And that, like, actually, what are we doing as, I say families, I mean households and neighbourhoods and communities, including single people, not like, what are we doing intentionally to be obedient to what God's called us to, reach the silent with the good news of Jesus, but that looks very different for each individual person, doesn't it, or each family unit or each household. And it's that, like, okay, are we intentional, and do we think intentionally about how we're going to do that? Like, I love a good, coming off the back of a good book and thinking, like, what can we do? But I've just read a book by John Mark Comer called Practicing the Way, and he has a sort of concept around just build a rule of life, just a way of being in the world that reflects the fact that you're intentionally trying to apprentice to Jesus, and that everything, rather than kind of Jesus gets my Sunday mornings or Jesus gets my Wednesday nights, Jesus gets my whole life, and so how does my whole life reorientate around that, and just come up with some frameworks. And I've just riffed off his, like, it's not, it might evolve and develop, but it's good what he's put. But just that, like, realizing that we're in a battle. If we want to go after the promises of God, we have to be intentional about that, because otherwise we're being formed by and shaped by a load of other stuff. And so it's easy to get pumped on a Sunday after, especially the Sunday we just had, and say, well, okay, God, I want to be strong and courageous in all that you've called me to do. But then by the time this podcast comes out, we're all distracted and back into materialism, or back into, just the tough situations that we've got going on and not being able to see our way out or whatever. And just, building structures and stuff in our lives and rules of life that help bring a level of intentionality, but then say, actually, this is the way we as a family are going to operate.
Yeah.
That's good.
The family workbook, I think one of the activities is like what, make like not rules, but I can't remember what it is, but how are you as a family gonna live differently? And I think the only thing me and Sim have is we say, the Kents don't quit. And so I think actually we need to have a look. Have you got an example of like one of yours?
So one of the we're a family of joy in a culture of consumerism and greed through generosity. So actually we, in a world where it's so easy to get caught up in like just more, actually to live the way Jesus lived, he lived completely generously, didn't he? So actually just by having something, and then underneath that there's like a thing that we'll do to, and it can be giving, it can be whatever, it can be inviting people in and being generous with the resources he's given us in our home, but just that's something that we are trying to grow in our intentionality around, to say, I want to be really deliberate about being intentional, not just because it's good for me and my family, but because it brings about the blessing of God. The whole still living with John Risbridge's, like, we're called to be blessed, to be a blessing, that kind of dynamic of just...
You're still in Genesis.
Yeah, I am. I'm still camped out there.
Catch up.
And how that does flow throughout the whole thing.
It does.
There's
I think, because even in
that.
Deuteronomy it was, love the Lord your God with your all your mind, your heart, your strength, and then it gets here and it's, God's word, have it on your lips, in your mind, and do, and
I think it's really easy to hear the big stories in Joshua. You hear the Jordan parting and then walking through. You hear Jericho crumbling whilst they're shouting and walking around it. You see the promised land given over to the Israelites, but it's easy to miss. I think it's Joshua 4 or 5, but before Jericho, so they've gone through the Jordan, and before they come to Jericho, Joshua comes and he sees the commander of the Lord's armies, and it's so similar to Moses and the burning bush. He's told to take his shoes off because he's standing in a holy ground, and then he lies flat down on his face and worships. And I think I find it in myself anyway, so easy to, God, I want the promises, I want the victories, I want I want what you've said over me, and that's not wrong at all. But actually, Joshua first of all came to the command of the Lord's armies, which is Jesus, and worshipped him, and came to him in reverence and humility, lying face down, and that's a challenge as well. We want to act in courage, but really it has to come through that moment with Jesus.
Yeah.
Very good.
And in worship you get a revelation, don't you, of Jesus afresh, and that almost in it. So you don't come to worship so that you're like, I'm buzzed up, I can go again. But that is just part of one of the blessings, isn't it? That when you focus your eyes on Jesus and you're in awe and you're just wow, and you're worshipping him, it is so much easier to then trust in him and in his strength and be courageous. You do see it throughout the Bible, don't you, where you have these moments of, wow, God, you are so holy, and the reverence and the awe and the worship and surrender, and then in order to go and do some scary things.
Thank you for joining us today. Leave any comments about experiences, stories that you may have that will build faith, and join us next week as we look at the book of Judges.